We're going to start today with a very in-depth study of the first two chapters of Genesis. I hope that this is not unfamiliar to you. You've probably learned it before. Some people, like Alvin and Stan, have actually spent probably more time on Genesis 1 and 2 than they care to remember. But we're going to do it again.
No, more. We want more.
You want more of it, okay? And we're going to look at it from a couple of different places. It's probably going to take us a couple of weeks to get through these two chapters alone. And what we're going to first do is we're going to read the text, because I think that the best way to ever approach a text is to just read it in its simple meaning. You can't go in. Come. I can move this out now. I don't need it anymore.
You lost your husband? It's okay. I've seen him.
Well, more important, you lost his
What a
chair.
wonderful
Yeah.
couple.
I mean, he could, crouch down
It's
here.
lovely.
He's expendable, but the chair.
There you go.
There's room for a chair. Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is Bert gone?
No, he went in the corner.
So in general, the packet that I handed out today that says Genesis 1, you don't need the photocopies. I gave you photocopies because I thought there might be a chance you would want to write on them.
Yes.
But if you don't want the photocopies in general, you can just use a Fumash.
Gotcha.
Regular standard version. Okay? I will let you know when we're going to get into this. For those of you who would like to start, because you are interested in getting going, you are welcome to read the preface and the introduction. But I would hold for a little bit on chapter 1. But if you want to go ahead and read chapter 1, you can. For adults only. This book, I'm going to ask that you bring to each class.
Okay.
This one.
Okay.
And just to show you, if you open it up and you just flip through it, you'll notice that the whole book is color-coded. Okay? It's paint by number. And you'll also notice at the very top, if you just open anywhere in the middle of the book, if you look in the upper left corner, you'll see the page number, and it'll say the Bible sources revealed. It tells you what book you're in of the Bible, Leviticus,
Gotcha.
or wherever you are. And on the right side, you'll see the color-coordinated, index, if you will, where there's J, E, P, R, J, E, and R, and other. Okay, and each of those is the font code to help you navigate it. Don't worry about it right now. We're only going to look at chapter 1 and 2. Please close them for now. Don't look at him.
Yeah, don't get smarter than
Spoiler.
We're going to start with a detailed explanation, or I guess look at Genesis 1 and 2. And we're going to use this as the first example of trying to understand what the author's intention is in the writing of this story. Or perhaps said a different way, what can we learn about the story based on who wrote it? Or what does the person who wrote us want us to take away from the story based on how it was written? We're going to look at all those things. The story should be very familiar to you, and then what we'll do actually afterwards, we're going to read a few different comparative ancient Near Eastern stories, how other civilizations thought about creation. Jews are not the only ones who thought about creation. Many civilizations have creation myths. I use that word broadly, because a myth could mean that it's fake, but a myth can also mean that it is a paradigm, or it's a model, or it's a story that we tell in order to explain something. So we're going to use it broadly. I had a Bible professor slash professor of theology, Neil Gilman. Some of you may know. He wrote a book called Sacred Fragments. And in thinking about Judaism, he actually described it through the lens of a myth. As if to say, the myth that you wear, or that you adhere to, informs how you live. So this is, in many ways, our myth. Right? This is what we adhere to. Christians have a different one, Muslims have a different one, everyone has a different one. He used the analogy of glasses and suggested that sometimes for people who wear glasses, or even if you wear contacts or whatever, you see things differently when your glasses are off than when your glasses are on. Most of us have been looking at the myth in one way, and now what we're going to do is look at it in a different way. Or perhaps myth.
That's the first time I've ever heard all of this described as a myth.
Isn't it? Well, we're going to get into... Well,
give them the technical theological definition.
Go ahead.
of myth.
Go ahead.
So, contemporary theologians use the word myth to mean a story that has religious meaning and you don't necessarily treat it literally, but the story helps you connect with the deeper meaning of your tradition.
Right. So,
So
but-
myth does not mean pagan gods and goddesses any longer.
correct. Well, when we're thinking about who wrote the Bible, the myth that we're trying to understand is that does the authorship matter in terms of how we understand it? Or does it not? Maybe we don't care who wrote it, or maybe we don't know who wrote it, or maybe not knowing or knowing doesn't really matter, because what we've done is we've taken this story and we've applied it in so many beautiful ways to who we are today. Okay? So we're going to read some text together. And as we read, I'm going to do some drawing on the board. Don't worry, I won't. It'll be just words, not anything artistic. Okay? We're going to start on page 3 of Genesis, because all good books begin on page 3. I'm going to hold for a moment the first word of the Torah. But before I do that, I just want to talk about how we typically think about the beginning of the Bible. What's the traditional way of translating the beginning verse of the Bible? In the beginning. Okay? Okay? In the beginning. Take a look at yours.
No, he doesn't.
What does ours say?
When God began. Which book are you in? Which book? Thank
I'm
you.
in the packet I handed out today, the Hebrew Bible, page 3.
Gotcha.
The beginning of the book of Genesis, Breshit, Parshat Breshit, chapter 1, verse 1.
Did the blue Chumash say in the beginning?
I don't think so. Fatin, on the third shelf down. Third shelf down. Up. Turn the up one more. One more. Okay, all the way to the left. That book right there.
This doesn't have the page 3. Oh, yeah. Starts with page 3.
The red one says, when God began to create. This is the Stone edition, or also the Art Scroll edition. It's the predominant one used in the Orthodox world. They have the translation in the beginning. I don't remember what Hertz has without looking at it, but if you see a Hertz up there, you want to check it.
Right outside.
Wonder how it altered.
Okay? Now, what's the difference fundamentally between in the beginning and when God began?
It assigns responsibility.
Say it again? It's how so?
Well, it says who did it.
Okay, good. So on one level, this piece adds the who. Okay, good. What else?
Well, you're also,
He,
when God began, you actually are stating that there's something before.
Ah, good. This one implies that there's something that happens before. What about this one?
That is the beginning.
This is the beginning. It's what we call creation ex nihilo. Okay, which means what?
From nothing.
Creation out of nothing.
So Hertz almost surely said in the beginning. Because this is the older JPS and it says in the beginning.
Okay. There's a reason why there's a debate as to how you started. We're going to look at the word Breshit a little bit later. But in essence, two translations. By the way, neither of these are Hebrew. Just to be fair, it's important that we look at the Hebrew. But these two different translations suggest differences in the way we're supposed to understand the story. This one is suggesting that creation was actually the first act. You could even make the argument, does God exist before creation?
Not in that case.
You could make the argument that God doesn't exist, or God is the only thing that exists. And therefore, God sets things in motion by forming stuff. Read a little bit longer in chapter 1, verse 1. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, tohu and vohu, right? The world was chaotic. With darkness over the surface of the deep, a wind from God sweeping over the water, and God said what?
Let
Let there be light. So how does God create?
He speaks it into
He
being.
speaks. Creation happens through speech. Bob, what were you going to say?
It implies that there was already water
Ah,
before there
so
was light or dark.
verse 2 suggests, actually the end of verse 2 says that there was something because it was unformed and void. It was chaos. So what is the act of creation? The act of creation is ordering chaos. In which case, there must have been something there, because
Chaos doesn't happen.
chaos,
chaotic.
that's correct.
Something.
There's got to be something, yeah?
Chaos is something.
Chaos is something. So something out of nothing. So the translations are very interesting because they tell us something about it. If we go with this one, when God began, what does that tell us about creation?
It was there before.
God existed before, Stan.
There may be other creations.
There could have been other creations. By the way, for those of you who believe or have struggled with the idea of how does science fit with creation story, this one works pretty well.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't? Why not?
First of all, in the beginning is the problem. First of all, if it's
Yeah.
a singularity, then that's when the time starts. So there's
Correct.
nothing before that. That's
Yep.
the first thing.
Yep. And the second one?
God began.
I'm talking about the second one.
So I'm talking about the second one. Yeah.
When God
So when God began, what's the problem with that?
That's the one. The problem is that there is something before, and time starts at that time. Time zero.
Time, yeah, it was
There is
sometime
no.
before.
There is no time minus the Big Bang.
Okay, but this could suggest that there was a Big Bang.
I think the first one may suggest that there was a Big Bang, but the second one doesn't.
All right.
I agree with you. I agree with
Because in this second one, you say there is a time that extends
So,
beyond the
right,
singularity.
so you could make the argument that the first one is the moment of Big Bang.
Yeah.
you. Yes.
Okay?
That's a
Whereas
possibility.
this one, Big Bang has already happened.
Yes.
Well, he's there.
Stan's shaking his head.
Could have been many Big Bangs.
Ah, we don't know how much time. Okay, this one sets the time at time zero. This one, we don't know what happened before.
0 plus X.
Sure.
God creates the heaven and the earth, but there could have been lots of stuff around before that.
Okay. The reason that this is important, yeah.
Well, if you read it in the beginning at when, it implies that the when is in the beginning. It does, they may not be separate.
Well, here I'm going to read to you for a second the traditional version, which says, "In the beginning of God's creating the heavens and the earth, when the earth was astonishingly empty, with darkness upon the surface of the deep." That's the Orthodox version. It's a pretty traditional translation. What do you notice about that one?
There's
Read it.
something over there.
There was something.
There was
They implied there was no sun.
It's pretty literal. This is a pretty literal translation.
You've got the construct state of Reshit there
Okay.
at the beginning of God's creating of this.
Yeah. We're going to have to look at this a little bit because we want to understand what's going on in creation. So let's read.
It kind of almost suggests it's an assembly process because there's already there stuff.
We're
And he's
gonna-
ordering it.
Yes, we're gonna make that argument. All right, so let's read Genesis chapter 1. And when we read, I want you to look at the following things. Who are the actors? How do they act? What are the ways that creation happens? And what is created? Okay, so we're just going to read the story. And I want you to think about those things as we go through it. Would someone like to read? Someone want to be our narrator?
So we're reading from this.
We're reading from this. We're chapter 3. We're reading at the very top where the English is next to the Hebrew. The stuff that's below it is commentary.
I'll read.
All right, Lou.
When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day.
Great. So let's stop for a second. What's created on the first day?
Light.
Day.
Yeah, day and
Day
night.
is created on
Light.
Light and
Light and
darkness
darkness
separated.
separated.
Okay. How does it happen? So what's the first thing?
God speaks.
God speaks. What's next?
Then God
And there's
saw.
wind. There's the wind.
So first, God
Then he
speaks.
saw.
Then he sees. Right? Verse 4. Then what?
Then he called.
Then God separates.
Oh, separate. Oh, yeah. And then God called.
And then
And then God called.
God calls.
Okay.
This is the process of creation according to the opening day of what we think of as the creation of the world according to the Torah. Okay? So God creates through the act of speaking. Then God looks at the creation. God then separates. What does it mean to separate something?
Make them
Divide, okay? So how do we get light and darkness?
blue.
Say it. Well, yes,
Sun.
thank you. The sun.
Sun sets.
Okay.
Sunrise.
Sun rises, sun sets. Swiftly. But what's actually happening?
Rotation.
Rotation. But according to the story,
Light is introduced into the darkness.
yes, light is introduced into darkness. Remember, what exists before light?
Darkness.
How does God create light from darkness?
He speaks it into being.
He said.
He speaks and then separates it out.
So it suggests that the light was diffused all over and he kind of concentrated it,
That's
collected
a really interesting way of thinking about it. Perhaps the light was there all along, but it needed to be concentrated. Right? It needed to be focused. It needed to be separated out. Go ahead.
I think you have to put your mind in the position of someone writing 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, or thinking 4,000
Yeah.
or 5,000 years ago, about how this may have happened. And don't try to read too much rationality into it.
Yes, let's read it literally. So fine, let's say that there was someone 4,000 or 5,000 years ago who was contemplating one day, how was the world created? How do we get light from darkness? Why would they come up with this whole idea of separation? You said it before, sunrise, sunset.
Well, without separation, you'd have a blob of light here for maybe 13 seconds over here, maybe another. It wasn't.
But there's no
It wasn't
void.
going to do anything.
And what would it be?
There's
It would be
chaotic.
It
chaotic.
would be chaotic. Yeah.
Creation is the act of ordering chaos. So what does God do? God creates points of time, order, sunrise and sunset. Time when there's light and time when there's darkness. Don't get me wrong, there are times where it's in between. Right, and we actually have a name for that in Jewish tradition.
These divisions have theological significance.
Say more.
Well, for instance, the time of day dictates when we pray, and after 7 days we hit Shabbat.
Yep,
And so we have all of these rhythms built in,
yep.
and it is saying that this Bayal Dale, and he divided, all of these divisions are deliberate and God ordained,
Great.
and they come from God.
Beautiful. All right, let's read day 2. Lou. We're on page 6.
Yeah, we're good. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, a second day.
What was created on day 2?
Skies.
The sky. Heaven. What's literally happening on day 2? Come on, you learned this in Hebrew school. This should be easy. Come on. Separation of waters.
separation of waters.
Land.
Okay, how has creation happened in day 2? God speaks.
Then he makes.
He makes and separates, and then calls it something. All right, and what is he actually what is he separating? The waters. Why does that make sense?
What's he separating?
He's creating what we call the upper waters and the lower waters.
Clouds.
Making room for
You got
land.
it. He's creating what we're going to call like the heavens and the seas, or the earth. Okay, this is usually what people say that happens on day 2, heaven and earth. But really what is God doing? God is separating the waters, which makes sense because my daughter came home yesterday and explained to me, she's in 1st grade, explained to me the water cycle. And she wrote that she's learning to write and read, and she wrote, we are polluting the waters, and drew a picture of fish dying in the waters. And on the side, as I'm doing the dishes, she writes, "Turn off the faucet." Okay? So I said to her, "What do you mean with the waters?" She said, "Well, there's waters in the sky, and that's how it rains, and there's waters in the sea." Okay, great. So she's teaching me a cycle. Yeah.
Why does it say called instead of named?
Good. Good. Why does it say called instead of named?
What does it say in the?
Yes. One could make an argument that it's a command. Any others?
What are the 2 Hebrew words for speak and call?
So for speak, we have vayomer. Vayomer is and he said.
Yeah.
Okay. Vayikra is and he called.
Yikra.
right? Or you could say, you could make the argument that it also means to name. When you, likro is to read something. So he's reading it or speaking it as this. He's naming it. So one could make the argument that it's ostensibly the same thing.
Okay.
There's very little place. I can't think of so many places where it says "and he named" in the Bible. There are namings, but I don't remember a specific word for it. Okay, so in this case, what we're creating here are the upper and lower waters. Okay. Lou, day 3.
God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters he called seas. And God saw that this was good. Is that it? No,
Nope, keep going.
Okay, keep going. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day.
What's created on day 3?
Plants.
Well, land.
Well, in particular, we have the pooling together of things. So now we have seas
Seas and the land.
and the land, and we have vegetation. Now, what do you notice about creation on day 3? What kind of language does God use? Is there speaking?
Yeah.
Is there separation?
Yes.
By the way, for those of you who like interesting words, in verse 9, it says, "Vayomer Elohim yikavu hamayim," which they translate as, "Let the waters be gathered." Has anyone ever heard of the word mikvah?
Yeah.
What's a mikvah?
Bath.
It's a pool of water. It's a bath. It's a ritual bath. So it uses the same root. Yikavu is from the same word as mikvah. By the way, there's another word that you might think is similar. Hatikva. But it's not the same root.
So why is this a gathering and not a
Mikvah.
separation?
Good question. In this case, now we don't separate, but we gather. It's a little weird, right? Why do we need to gather?
Well, it is separating.
It already exists.
It is separating because you're gathering it.
And it says
It
that
is an act of separation. It's just a different word. Okay? Yep.
because it says the dry land may appear.
It was just the word pooling
Yep.
different bodies of water together to make a larger body of water,
Yep.
the ocean.
Okay.
And the removal of that water from land, or from where it was before, leaves bare dry land.
Beautiful. Great. So there
So
is
this
an
land-
act of separation.
So the land was in a mikvah.
Yes. Well, yeah, sure. Sure, I like it. By the way, there's another element here in this. And on day 3, there's a different thing that God says about the creation. What is it?
It's good.
It was good. This creation was good. How many times does it say it?
Yes, every time. It was
Twice.
Not every time.
Oh.
This time it says twice. By the way, has anyone ever heard the custom to get married on a Tuesday?
Yes.
The reason why people get married on a Tuesday is because on Tuesday it was doubly good.
Because Saturday wasn't available. And moving also.
I choose not to move because it's too much work. Marriage is a lot less work than.
So Rabbi,
So if it was good, did he try one before and it didn't work out?
Say it again.
So if it is good, had he tried it once before?
So it's an interesting question. There are 2 elements of goodness here. The first is in the poolings of the water. What's the second aspect of goodness? In the vegetation. And in this case, how does God create vegetation? Look at the beginning of verse 11.
He says, let go.
God speaks again. God speaks and causes the stuff to grow. All of the different things. And out, in verse 12, Vatotzeh haaretz deshe. Out of the ground comes out stuff. Has anyone ever heard the prayer, Hamotzi lecha min haaretz? Hamotzi is the one who causes things to be pulled out. It's the exact same word as the beginning of verse 12, Vatotzeh. There's a reason that we say Hamotzi lechem, right? That is taken out of the earth. Okay, and so it brings all of these things out, and then again, at the very end of verse 12, God sees. Okay, so we have this repetition of speaking, seeing, separating. Sometimes we have pooling.
Gathering.
We have calling, and then sometimes we add blessing. Or naming. Okay, these are acts of creation. Let's look at day 4. Lou.
God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years. And they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a 4th day.
Great. So what's created on day 4?
Sun, moon,
The sun, the moon, stars. Okay, the celestial beings.
No, you could say day and night.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. And why, or I should say how, is this created? What does it tell us about it?
How did he create vegetation without the sun?
Good question. God, I think, thought that, you know what, for one night it'll be okay.
He is the sun. But there was sun before.
Or she.
All right, so let's not get too buried into the details of the agricultural process. Let's just look for a second, Jerry.
I don't understand this God saw.
Okay, me either.
Didn't God know it was going to be good? What do you mean he saw it was going to be good?
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. Because one of the things that we have to understand is why is it that God is given human-like quality? Okay, it's a big fancy word called anthropomorphism.
Isn't it that God is a human?
We're going to get there, right? One of the things that we're going to debate between Genesis 1 and 2 is who is the God that is creating? Is it one? Is it multiple? Is it human? Is it angelic? Is it something else? We're not there yet, but hold that thought and we're going to come back to it.
Celestial beings. I missed that.
Yeah, where were the celestial beings?
It doesn't say it.
Angels?
Doesn't
Well,
describe them.
Let's look at it for a second, okay? It says in verse 14, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night." So we've got separation again, we've got God speaking again. They'll serve as signs for all time. Otot ulamoadim. All right?
No, this is fine.
So hold the word sign for a second.
Okay.
And then it says that they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights. There was a greater light and a lesser light, and the stars. As if to say one light is more powerful than the other light. Namely,
The sun, and
the
moon.
sun. By the way, there's a really beautiful midrash that talks about the moon being really upset with God and crying because the moon wanted equal opportunity. Why does the sun get better off? So eventually, as a result of the midrash, God says, don't worry, I'm going to give you a gift. You are going to appoint the times. And therefore, every month on Rosh Chodesh, it'll be all about the moon. The moon's got a context.
It's interesting that, this whole thing uses speaking, because when you think of speaking, you hear listening.
Yes.
And there's no
one to hear
one
it.
to hear it.
Beautiful.
So this whole, the use of the speaking is kind
But
of
that kind of goes back to the does a tree make noise
You should
when
know
it falls
that.
in an empty forest?
Could be. We haven't even made trees yet.
I'm surprised.
But you're right.
It's like that when there's always
And it goes back to Jerry's question. Why do we need to know that God speaks? Why do we need to know that God sees? Why does it matter that God blesses? Why, wouldn't it have just been easier to say, light and darkness was created, heaven and earth was created, this was created, that was created? Bob?
This makes it much more understandable to the people who are telling these stories.
Yeah.
And the people who heard them.
Yes.
It had to be explained in a way that they could understand.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing about authorship. When an author is telling a story, what are the kinds of things that the author wants to convey? What are they thinking about in writing?
There's the reading.
Say it again.
Your audience.
Authenticity. What'd you say?
I said there's the audience, the reader.
They're thinking about the reader, right? Say it again. The message, right? What is the takeaway? And how is the story going to be retold?
Yeah.
This is not a story that we read once. Could you imagine how short the services would be if we only read this once? We would never have Torah reading again because we would have finished it thousands of years ago. Okay? But hold on, I want to just go a little bit further. So God made the greater light, the lesser light, one dominates the other. God sent them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness, and God saw that it was good. What do the sun and the moon and the stars become in the ancient world? Gods. They become signs. Right? Today, who here reads their horoscope? Anyone read a horoscope? Okay. What is a horoscope all about?
Astrology.
What about the stars? What about the astrology? Position of what? Of the stars, the planets, the different things. Who here ever looks up at the sky and looks for the Gemini or the Toro or the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper or the whatever? What do the stars become? They become mythology. They become celestial beings. It's not there yet, but wait until we get to the description of how God creates humanity. Is it one God that creates humanity, or is it multiple that create humanity? We're going to have to look at that, and part of what we're starting to see here is perhaps a tension in terms of what is created. Are they simply signs of light and darkness, or are they more complex than that? Right now, we could just argue, Stan's right, it's just light and darkness, don't read more into it. But we're going to get a little bit further, and we're going to start to see things unfold in a different way. Stan.
Were you going to mention anything about the fact that we got, on the first day we separated light from darkness, and day 4 we got the moon, the sun, and the stars?
Hold it. I'll direct you to the board. All right, let's look at day 5.
Exactly what I was going to.
My creepy crawly friends. Verse 20, page 8. Go ahead, whenever you're ready.
God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures,
Woohoo!
and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." God created the great sea monsters, and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters,
creeps. All the things that creep and all the creeps.
which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and increase. Fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a 5th day.
Okay, what's created on day 5?
Animals.
Specifically,
Creatures and birds.
Sea creatures and birds.
Fish.
or the sea,
Monsters.
Same,
and
yeah,
heaven.
Yeah, why does it use the word monster?
Monsters.
What's wrong with
Loch
monsters?
Ness.
This is how Loch Ness was created.
Any large creature from the ocean was considered a monster.
Yes, large creatures were. And by the way, some of the largest creatures are like really big fish, like the Leviathan. All right, or perhaps even it's a foreshadowing of the biggest fish, like the story of Jonah. Okay, so they're all good. There's an additional thing here that God's add to the story of creation. What else is involved in this creation? Blessing. But what's the blessing in particular?
Be fertile.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Baby monster.
Okay, we're going to come back to this one in a second, not just because it's fun and exciting, but because it's actually going to be the first commandment of the Torah.
It's the first directive.
It is the first directive. Okay, we're going to get there in a second. All right, now let's create humanity. Read this one carefully, really carefully, as we go from page 9 at the top, verse 24, through the end of verse 31 on page 11. Okay, Lou?
God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things of the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase. Fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth." God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and found it very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day.
All right. What is created on day 6?
Man.
All the bees,
Humans.
all the animals, and then
Animals.
man and woman.
The land animals.
Every kind of living creature.
And the right to be a vegetarian.
Now, yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Audrey, because this is the proof text that suggests that humanity was supposed to be vegetarian.
Right.
Don't tell Michelle Booth I told you that. Because what does the text literally say? What is it for us to eat?
You will eat the green.
That's right. And what are we supposed to do with the animals? We're supposed to dominate them. Which means what?
Use them for work.
Okay, so it could be for work, could be we're the apex predator, could be lots of different things, but it's not clear. But it would seem to be from verse 29 that we're only supposed to eat the vegetation. That's what it seems. Huh?
The animals also are.
Correct. The animals are also supposed to be herbivores. Okay?
We have to tend to them.
Yep, we're supposed to, right, and we'll get to that a little bit later in chapter 3. One other thing, actually in chapter 2, one other thing that is interesting, how does the blessing work in this time? It's very good, right? It's not just good, it's very good. And there's one other thing, what is the command of the for humanity?
Fertile.
We're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. This is the first commandment in the Torah. All right, now we skipped over the hard part. Go ahead, Emily.
Maybe I wasn't paying good enough attention before, but
That's the hard part.
now he's talking to us. He says you.
Ah, yes, because there's someone to talk to. Yeah.
Okay, what about the hour?
Okay, that was the hard part. That's what we're going to go to.
Exactly.
Before we look at the hard part, I just want to show you something about the method of creation. If you look at creation, days 1, 2, and 3 line up with days 4, 5, and 6. And the theory goes is that God creates the habitats first, and then creates the things that will dwell in the habitats. And so, on day 1, God creates light and darkness. On day 4, God creates that which will live in light and darkness, the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Why wouldn't it do it when day 1 and day 2?
That's a great question. Well, one second. Heaven and earth, God then creates the things that live in the seas and in the heavens. And on day 3, the things that will live on the seas and the land, namely animals and humanity. And so creation is also not just an exercise in creating, but an exercise in ordering. Now, ask your question again.
I said, why didn't he go 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6?
Great question. Why not go this way instead of this way?
Right. Well, where
Get the
was
base first.
Okay, maybe it's about getting the base first. Anyone else?
No.
They'd starve to death until it's finished.
Could be.
6.
Yeah? What are you thinking, Alvin? Your face is saying a lot of different things right now.
Well, you can't have 4, 5, and 6 really, unless you have 1, 2, and 3.
You could make the argument that you can't have 4, 5, and 6 without 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 is not just about habitat, but it's setting in motion the things that you need in order to live, in order to have the creation. And by the way, I would make the argument that the reason why 4 comes before 5 and 6, not just numerically, is because what do the sun, moon, and stars do? Heat, sure. What else?
Seasons.
Seasons. What else?
Light.
Light. What else?
Help the plants. You need the plants.
They cause all of the stuff to grow, right?
Gods.
Huh?
Gods.
Okay, they become a source of God, yeah.
Navigation.
What does it say?
Navigation.
Navigate. Yes, they become our compass of how to live. They create a sense of order. Remember, creation, according to the very beginning of our story, is all about ordering chaos. Could you imagine if we put humanity on Earth without being able to figure out our up from our down, our left from our right, our night from our darkness? Most of us can't even navigate as it is, but okay, that's another story. Now, let's get to the heart.
Washington is right now?
Sorry?
Isn't that where Washington is right now?
Yeah.
But I digress.
All right, let's look at the hard part. Look on page 9. We are in the middle of the story of the creation of humanity. 26.
26.
Verse 26. All of a sudden, God says the following. Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmutenu v'yurdu v'gat hayam u'v'of hashamayim u'v'behema u'v'chol ha'aretz u'v'chol ha'remes ha'remes ha'aretz v'yivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elohim bara uto zachar u'nekeva bara utam. Which means, and God spoke, or said, let us make man. I just want you to know.
Plural. Who is us? Plural.
Yeah. Let us make man in our image, in our likeness.
Right.
And they're going to rule the fish of the sea and the cattle and all these other things. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them.
The first use of the royal we.
Okay, that's one possibility. What's the problem here?
A couple of gods. Like one named God.
Okay, maybe. By the way, we have not answered this question. Who is the God of chapter 1?
Elohim is the God of chapter 1.
Is it Elohim?
Good. So we have a couple of problems with the creation of humanity. In the creation of humanity, we have a singular versus plural God. Plural. Sometimes it seems like it's God creating, and sometimes it seems like it's more than one God created. We. Now, what is the name of the God of chapter 1? Elohim. I'm going to write it in English for a second. I'm going to write it in Hebrew for you as well. Okay, Elohim. What other name might you think should be in the story of the creation if we're talking about God? Adonai. Is there a mention of the word Adonai at all in chapter 1? No, there is not. Hold for 1 second, and I want you to turn to page 13. We are looking at verse 4b. It's not going to say B on there, but I'm looking at the second half of verse 4. And it says, such is the story of the heaven and earth when they were created, when the Lord God made earth and heaven, ... In Hebrew, what does it say?
Adonai.
Adonai Elohim. Why? Why all of a sudden do we introduce Adonai as a way of describing Elohim? Yeah.
It seems to now refer to a primary God.
It's the boss.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying, like the God and one's called God.
Yeah. So let's look at the word for a second. Elohim. Sorry, Bob, for just a
I
second.
am, which is usually the plural form of the word.
Right.
Okay. This is the word Elohim. How do I say it singularly? El. Allah. Right. Okay. Good.
You only find that in Job
And Ha'azim. I just know because of my reference question. Okay, so El. El is the singular. So how come we don't ever call God El? We do. El Elyon, right? But how about the divine attributes? How do we sing those, Lou? Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum. Okay, we don't just call God the Lord, we call God the Lord El. Yep, El Shaddai. We have it attached to different places. But in this case, we're calling God Elohim. I don't want to get into why yet. I just want you to notice it. And I also want you to notice that there is something weird about the way that humanity is created according to the story. What does it suggest in the text by reading that let us create man in our image, in our likeness? Yeah, Stan?
It's sort of like maybe there's a heavenly host to whom he's speaking.
Okay, maybe there's a whole group of people that gathered. Could you imagine it was like a synagogue annual meeting? They all got together to try to make a decision about how they were going to create humanity.
Is God omnipresent?
Ah, good. Is God omnipresent? Or you could even go so far as to say omnipotent. Is God all-powerful? Can God really do this all by God's self?
It sounds as though mankind was created by a committee.
Ah, well that explains so much. Okay, maybe we were created by a committee.
And that's why we all live
Yep.
different.
Of
But
whom?
it says
Of whom? Right.
Of God.
It says our image, it doesn't say our images. Or
Okay.
so if there's like one, or
There's an inherent contradiction in the text. Let us create man in our image.
And we all
have the same.
But there's a problem. That salmenu kidmutenu is actually plural. It's not our image like singular. It's a collective our.
Okay.
Right? It's the we, it's the anachnu form. Right? If I want to say that we're all going out, right, I'm talking about a group of people. So why does this matter? Why spend so much time on this?
Maybe we're polytheistic.
Zillions on it.
Okay, civilization has spent bazillions of time on it. Why else?
Might be polytheistic.
We may be polytheistic. Yes, I think that you can entertain that notion here. What else?
It's to show the power that God owns. If you use I or me, it means, the power is too, it's not as big as the power of us.
Okay, could be. Everyone grab your book, The Bible Sources Revealed. Everyone please turn to page 33. This is Genesis chapter 1. You'll notice on page 32 there is a full key of what everything looks like. Okay? And you will see that Genesis chapter 1 is in blue bold, if you will, or blue sands probably. Blue sands. In which case you'll notice next to it, it has a letter P. Okay? Which is priestly, so to speak, for the moment. I want you to turn to Genesis 2. We didn't actually read the seventh day, which is Shabbat, the Vayachulu HaShamayim, everything, but whatever, God rested. And look what happens in chapter 2. Chapter 2, verses 1, 2, and 3 are in that same blue color. Verse 4 is in a weird, bolded, shaded color. And then look at the rest of chapter 2. It's in green.
Green, yeah. And this is 3, 4,
And if you go back to your key, you'll notice that the green is the letter J.
RJE.
So Rabbi Green wanted to get us into that.
Green metallic or green?
green.
This book is going to suggest that what you are reading in chapters 1 and 2, and by the way, we've only read chapter 1 so far, but that chapter 1 and 2 were actually written by two different people. And I'm going to try to prove it to you next time.
It's this.
Because when we look at the text of chapter 2, you will see that it's almost like you are reading a whole second creation story. And you kind of have to ask yourself, well, wait a minute, didn't I just read this? And why is this one different? The classic example is, how are humans created in the second Genesis story? You all know this one too? Go ahead, Ellen.
Well, Adam is created and then Eve. That
Red.
whole.
Yes, right? God does the first surgery, right? Puts Adam under anesthesia. Adam lies down and sleeps, does a surgical procedure to remove the rib from him, and takes that rib and creates Eve.
But that's not
Well,
how
that's
it's said in...
not in chapter 1.
That's not in chapter 1.
How is humanity created in chapter 1?
Same with...
Men and women.
Men and women are created at the same time. How else are they created?
They're spoken into being.
They're spoken into being, and who does the creating?
Us.
A plural. In Genesis chapter 2, it's only one person that does it, or one thing that does it.
So,
Yeah.
but when you, the word Elohim in Hebrew, is it plural or no?
It is technically plural.
Because
Yeah.
I am, but do you think of it?
But most of these verbs are singular. Vayomer.
Correct.
So the
It actually doesn't make sense. If you look at just take a look at verse 24, verse 20, any of the paragraphs that begin the act of the creation of a day. They all start Vayomer Elohim. That in and of itself is an inherent grammatical contradiction. Why? Because if you wanted to say Vayomer, it would have to be Vayomer El.
Yes.
Not Vayomer Elohim, it'd have to be Vayomru Elohim. But we have, for whatever reason, said we're going to lump Elohim together as one God. Now, I haven't introduced this yet, but El is actually an ancient Near Eastern god that is not Jewish or Israelite. Who is El? It's a Canaanite god. And what you're going to start to see is that reading this story may actually be the combining of, or the amalgamation of, or the sifting out of different ancient traditions in order to be able to get our narrative. And that may be the reason why chapter 2 is there. Yeah.
Is there any significance to the
Probably not.
translation? The first 5 days, the translation is a first day, a second day, and the sixth day is the sixth day, as opposed to a.
Yom HaShishi. Yes, there is. And the reason is because if you look in the Hebrew at the end of each day, it says Vayer Vayivoker Yom Rivi'i, Yom Chamishi. But look at the Hebrew for the last one, Vayer Vayivoker Yom HaShishi. By the way, that is how we begin Kiddush. Vayer Vayivoker Yom HaShishi. Vayachulu Hashamayim B'Haaretz, and that's chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, and then we stop, and hopefully we will eat soon. Okay. So that,
But that didn't answer his question.
I mean, why
the hay?
Why the hay there? What the hay?
What the hell? It's always one. So yes, the translation is reflecting a difference in it, and we would have to try. Correct. We would have to then look at the grammar and understand why is hay added for hashishi. In the same way, by the way, it probably parallels the idea that it was tov ma'od. So it's emphasizing hashishi, but there's something else that happens. What happens at the end of the sixth day?
God rests.
Before God rests.
Man and woman are created.
No, at the end of the sixth day, look at the very beginning of chapter 2. The first creation story actually ends in verse 3 of chapter 2. What does God do first? God finishes. Vayachulu. The word vayachulu means, and God finished. Right? What is God finishing? The heavens and the earth. God has finished the heavens and the earth and all their array. And then the seventh day begins. Remember, you can't have Shabbat if God's still at work.
Right.
You got to work in the morning. You work a half day.
You worked that. It was winter time. The day started early. Right. Okay.
So from the Hebrew, is there any indication in terms of, that this Hebrew was different in terms of timing of when the first one was written before the second one?
Yes, we're going to look at the historical accuracy, what we'll call the historicity of the text. I didn't make it up. When I heard it for the first time, I thought it was made up, but I didn't make it up. It's not the hysterectomy, it's not a hystercorrectomy, it's the historicity. Okay? Because what we want to understand is it possible that one text was written at a different time than the other text? And if so, why? What does the author choose? What did you say? Which one was first? Why? If there was a first one, why do we need to write a second one?
Right.
And we're going to get there because part of what we need to unpack is that this may actually be the key to understanding the theology of the book of Genesis.
Or something you referred last.
Correct. Well, yeah, we're going to have to get to all of that.
What you said last time is revisionist history.
Yes, that's true. So if you want, you can take a look at this book at home and peruse it. He's got a good introduction in this one that will give you a landscape of it. You can read the introduction and the preface in Who Wrote the Bible. If for those of you who would like, you are welcome to go ahead and read chapter 1. But what the following chapters do is they're going to start to introduce these other authors. Okay, for those of you who don't like the historical, I would say read it if you want, but instead look at this one and look at the differences. Pick your favorite passage in the Torah. Go look at the Shema. Go look at the Ten Commandments. 5 sentiments exactly. Look at some of the things that you know. Look at your Bar Bat Mitzvah portion if you had one, and see what color it is. Okay?
Did they have colors?
You get to keep both of them.
Wow. So this is the whole Chumash actually?
This is the entire 5 books of Moses.
And it has been parsed out.
It has all been parsed out.
Okay.
It ends at Zot HaBracha, the very end of the Torah, on page 368. It is only the 5 books of Moses. We will at some point look at certain other pieces of literature, like the book of Esther and Psalms and other wisdom literature, but this is only the 5 books of Moses.
So this doesn't have Friedman's words in it.
It has his notes in it.
It has its notes.
Yeah, there are oftentimes notes at the bottom. Those are Friedman's. But the purpose is that this is meant to be a companion to this, so that when you're studying Torah after having read this book, it makes sense what it is that you're looking at here. Yeah.
Based on our current calendar,
Yes.
do we have any idea what time of year the earth was created? What creation took place?
According to the rabbinic tradition,
Yeah.
Rosh Hashanah.
It is Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. Rosh Hashanah commemorates the new month that is the anniversary of Hayom Harat Olam, right? Which you may remember, Hayom Harat Olam. Da, 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 da. What does that mean? Today was the day that the world was born. No, not created. Born. Right? Now, by the way, that's a really interesting distinction, because then you get into the place where we started is it in the beginning or when God began?
Also, is Rosh Hashanah the first day or the last day?
Right.
Which one of those?
Correct. Is it conception or is it delivery? But we can go there another time.
Along with the gestation.
All right, any questions? How's everyone doing with this?
Yeah.
Okay?
More than we anticipated.
More than you anticipated. Don't worry, it'll start to flow a little bit more as we get into it. Next time what we're going to do is we're going to look at chapter 2. So if you want to read chapter 2 in advance, by all means, and we're going to compare.
In this book.
You can read it in this book if you want. For those, I always think it's important to have the Hebrew. This book does not have the Hebrew. It's the one downside. So if you have a Chumash, look in the Chumash. But I would read it ideally first in the traditional as is, and then I would look at the commentaries if you want to. But what I want to look at next time is what is the difference and similarities between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Okay, and we're going to start to introduce the idea of God. Right? So far we've just said that God was involved, but we haven't actually talked about what that means. Okay?
So when this came out,
Say okay?
how heretical was it?
Heretical? It was
Your father-in-law
Quite
would have
heretical.
loved this.
quite.
Must have been a lot of
Actually, the
backlash.
person who created this, so this was, the donation was made in honor of the Torah.com, which does the critical thinking around it. The person who created the Torah.com is actually an ultra-Orthodox rabbi who has been cast aside by many people because of his reinterpretation of the text. Because what we're going to essentially argue, perhaps, is that God may not have been the primary author, or the author at all. That in and of itself is heretical. Right, yeah. I'm with Fred. I think that God is female. Or genderless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Genderless.
It has to be genderless. Absolutely.
Genderless.
No, but it has to be.
I mean,
At the end of the
we can
day,
now use the right method. She's
From different names of God, like the Shekhinah, the Bat Kol, there's several names of God. There's actually no clear indication in the text that God is male.
So it's fluid.
That's the only reason, but that's not because that God is male.
So when are we going to
That's
get a
because the
genderless?
default was male.
When are we going to get a genderless?
Where did he get the idea of creating email?
We do.
Google.
And ours is truly genderless.
No, the JP.
We'll look at it. So I think that's an interesting question. One of the things we didn't look at is the creation story written proactively or retroactively? Is it written in response to what's happened? Or did God actually write it as God was creating it? Right? If it was written in response, then we can tell the story however we want. If God is writing it for the first time, then God's going to dictate what it is it's going to look like. Yeah.